So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Intentional Endowments Network, part one of the three-part series on unconscious bias. If you're here to acknowledge implicit and explicit bias and interrupt it in your organizations in the asset management space, you are in the right place. And you're here with us at IEN as we're celebrating Juneteenth season with action. And for those of you who don't know who I am, I want to introduce myself. I'm Paris Prince. My pronouns are they and them. And I am co-host of this Jedi session along with my colleagues here, Sorel Gachu and Bella Alvarez, who are behind the scenes making much of this happen for us. But even though we're co-hosts, how we really do it at IEN and our network community, you are really the co-hosts. So we want you in the chat really chiming in. We know you have specific needs. That's why you're here. So in the chat, let us know, ask what you want to learn. And in doing so, you will guide the conversation. Because this space is for you and you are our community of learners. So go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself in the chat. As you do, I can tell you I am blessed to serve as Intentional Endowments Network Director of JEDI, and I greet you all from Richmond, Virginia, which is also the unceded and traditional territories of the Powhatan, among other tribal and nation names we have unfortunately forgotten. At IEN, we host a spectrum of learning opportunities to provide engaging and collaborative experiences for you. And I want you to know that we're going to send you the recording. We're sharing the slides and materials you'll see from our distinguished panelists. You can access and share the tools and resources you'll see today so you can advance JEDI and the communities you serve. So when you receive them, please share with those who want to learn more about what we're doing here and how we're really bringing people closer together by building a peer network of learners. And I thank you all for joining. Now, I want to put up a poll really quick to learn more about your perspective and how you're entering this conversation. There's an audience poll that just popped up that just asks about your role in asset management. Take a second and respond. All right, it looks like we have a lot of OCIOs, about 25%, managing directors, about 15%. CIOs, 5%, consultants, 5%, CFOs, 5%, field building, 5%, and asset managers, 5%. So we have a really interesting and a diverse set of perspectives represented here. And in the chat, hello, Kenny Stone says, powerful team of panelists, thanks for hosting. Thank you, thank you. And thank you to Enith. Hello, Enith. Enith says, very happy to be here from Reparations Finance Lab. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. And we have our panelists here as well. I'm so excited that you're here. Before I turn things over to our amazing moderator, Angela, I will move through today's program. And on the next slide, I'm going to mention a little bit about IEN for those who are new in this space. So at IEN, we are dedicated to JEDI in the investment process. And the way we do this is by serving hundreds of members at organizations and institutions across the country to accelerate actions by endowments to advance JEDI goals that are in large part about who is doing the investing, who receives investment, and how those decisions are made. Investing in racial equity, our primer for college and university endowments is going to be dropped to that. A link is going to be dropped to that in the chat. So everyone have access to that. And our JEDI initiative focuses on supporting endowments through the progress outlined with 12 action steps here. Progressing through the first action step, which is to learn. We have to assess our perceptions, which is what we're doing here today, and also to diversify the board and investment committee to bring in new insights and spur new approaches and expand networks. Then to build consensus, about your racial equity goals, investment strategies and actions. Then to update and evaluate your investment policy statement to reflect those D&I priorities. So important to then invest and engage and then iterate and share by disclosing information on your diversity and inclusion strategy and progress for transparency and accountability. So today we're going to be digging deeper into that first learning action step, into our biases we all have to help us design spaces of equity and belonging where everyone is welcome to rise, thrive, and succeed. Our speakers today, as you can see on your screen on the next slide, honor us with the opportunity to hear from them and learn. Joining our moderator, Angela, is Demetriouse Russell and Dorien Nunez, as you can see on your screen here. Today, we're going to be discussing their experiences changing asset management for good and specific tools and resources to implement that initial learning step of overcoming unconscious bias that's outlined in the primer. Some of you may know our amazing moderator, who is Director of Investment Staff and Diverse Manager Equity at Crucial Partners, LLC. When it comes to commitment and dedication to change and asset management for good, we're talking about none other than Angela Outlaw-Matheny. For those who don't know Angela, be in touch. You will thank me for it. She's an educator and advocate who uncovers blind spots and the things just no one else sees. I could go on and on. Angela has a focus on giving diverse managers access to capital, diverse managers who, are getting overlooked and often excluded. And Angela works to level the playing field as expert on matters of diversity and inclusion as it relates to democratizing capital and diversifying portfolios and racial equity. And with all of that, I'm just so excited because you all get to meet Angela. So let me stop sharing my slides here so we can give a warm welcome in the chat to our moderator. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much, Paris. Thank you all for being here to take part in this really important discussion at a really critical time in our world, in the industry. How do we socialize on, getting access to capital with respect to the stakeholders who should be at the table? How do we continuously educate our industry about the best-in-class managers that we have built a pipeline for? So let me just start by telling you a little bit about my background and Crucial Partners and where we stand in the ecosystem. I spent a long time at a financial services law firm, and I had different roles. I was part of the investment management group that helped to form documents, create document formation for what we call today emerging managers, but we didn't use that term back in the day. But they were all white males who typically spun out of some larger asset management firm, and we would help with their legal documents. Fast forward, after business school, I ended up at the time, Colonial Consulting, and we are today Crucial Partners. And that rebranding effort actually bodes well for who we are in terms of our culture, our mission, and our values. Colonial Consulting really didn't align with who we are as a firm, and especially with the diverse manager work that we are doing. We've been around since 1980. Our client base is all nonprofit organizations, and that includes schools, hospitals, museums, community foundations. And you would think that most of the community foundations and all of the nonprofits, they want to be mission aligned in terms of lining up their values and missions with that of their portfolio. But the fact is that they are woefully and inadequately allocating to diverse managers. And we want to uncover some reasons why. And we want to work as an ecosystem to move forward and go from momentum to movement with respect to the protests that we've seen. We want to acknowledge Juneteenth and the importance of that. I didn't even grow up knowing about Juneteenth, so I hope you all are educated about that and how that actually correlates to this discussion today and what we've seen historically in the asset management industry. Inequality, not having access to capital for this very, very critical group of best-in-class managers is what we're going to be talking about. So I'm happy to be here today on behalf of my firm. We manage about 35 billion for our clients. We have about 130 clients. And my role is really, really critical. I was appointed by our CEO and CIO to focus on building what we refer to as a robust pipeline of asset managers. We realized that we weren't diversifying, using all of the benefits of diversity when it comes to portfolio construction. So that's going to be a critical thing to mention here today. We think that variant perception is very important. So that includes gender, ethnicity, geography, different life journeys. All perspectives belong at the table, and we call that variant perception. Now, in connection to our diverse manager work and hiring managers to augment our clients' portfolio, we look at this work as a spectrum. We're talking about economic mobility here, folks. And so when we look at the talent pipeline, we examine who do we want to include on the spectrum. So we get interns early, and we bring them along the way. We catch them while they're in high school and in college, and we train them on the fundamentals of asset management and capital markets. And I come in to really educate our CIO and I and other team members, my esteemed colleagues who I respect so much, who have made me a better person. We educate them about the industry and how we think about economic mobility through racial equity and just really building smart portfolios. And so we have a cohort of interns that we hire each year, 8 to 10 students. And we don't only look at Ivy League institutions. We believe that talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. So we source from Ivy League and non-Ivy League schools, both city and state universities. And so I'm so happy to be here today to kick off this discussion. And I want to introduce to you first someone that I deeply respect and met early on in my journey in this important role, and that is Dorien Nunez. Dorien leads the research for Omni Research. And I can't tell you how amazing he's been as a strategic partner, sort of threading the needle for me in terms of what has happened historically in this industry, as if I needed another white paper or more education, but you need a historian such as Dorien so he can take others, me and others, way back so that we could examine how disenfranchised and underestimated diverse managers have not been able to take advantage of economic mobility and how important that is. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Dorien, so you could tell us more about yourself, what you focus on, and how you're a critical part of this discussion in connection to the work that we still have to do in this nation.
Well, thank you very much, Angela. Should I just do my brief introduction here, or do I go into my presentation part here? You're the moderator, you tell me.
Yes, I would love for you to truncate what you do. You can go into your presentation, but just kick us off and tell us about the critical work that you do and how
Let me start with that. Sure, let me start with a brief intro and then we can circle back because I do have slides in the presentation. The short version of this is I'm currently celebrating 50 years on Wall Street. I'm a native New Yorker, now living in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm an amateur astronomer, and as a child, I was a professional saxophone player. I like to brag about that, especially down here in New Orleans. So I'm one of those Ivy League educated people, Harvard Business School, Harvard undergrad, and like Demetriouse, did some work with Progress Investment Management under the guidance of Mark Kazanoff, who I'll talk about later. So we've been doing this for a long time. I'm honored to be named a senior fellow of IEN. past senior fellows have been the co-founder and the chancellor of the California university system. So I hope to live up to that. And I'm just glad to be here. So we'll talk more and share more. And we want everyone to be an expert by the end of the 3-week session.
Thank you, Dorien. All right, would you like to go into your slides now, or?
I'll defer to, we can introduce Demetriouse, and then I can go back to the slides so people know who he is. And then I'll happy to walk you through the slide that I have put together.
Thank you. Oh, okay, so next up is Demetriouse Russell. He is an expert and coach and executive coach, and he trains leaders about the issues that we are going to touch upon today. So Demetriouse, in the interest of time, I'm just going to kick it over to you for your short intro.
Sure, I'll be brief. First of all, it is fabulous to be here with you, Angela, and my good friend Dorien. So I'm as excited as any of the people who are in the audience to be here today. I'm going to be talking about unconscious bias a little later, but before we get there, like Dorien, we have a lot in common. Formerly Director of Private Equity at Progress Investment Management Company, having the honor and privilege to work with Mark Skazanov and Thurman White, two stalwarts in the industry. Alum of Morehouse College, London School of Economics, and Harvard Business School. And so what we do as a firm, Venn Diagram Partners, are 3 things. It's customized leadership development, where we go into firms and we work particularly with Black, Latinx, people of color, to help them improve their leadership skills. So that's one area of expertise. The second one is what we call DEIB consulting. So we've become really good at helping organizations create strategies, form and sustain ERGs, stand up DEIB committees. So we have a playbook around that. And for us, that work is about what problem are we identifying so that we can solve it. That's what makes our work stick. And then the third part of it that you pointed out is the executive coaching. And what we like to tell firms, if you're not willing to invest in the coaching component of any training, you might as well flush the money down the toilet, because it doesn't stick. And so I'm looking forward to having a real conversation today that's not going to be academic, that's going to be pragmatic, so that we can help organizations move the needle. So more from me later. Thank you, Angela.
All right. Thank you, Demetriouse. Okay, Dorien, back over to you.
All right, let's run. As Warner Wolf in New York used to say, let's go to the videotape. So let's go to the slides. Come on. Well, we'll start with this. You can play this. This was going to be the last part, but we'll let this be the first part. Think we need volume? And we might be having some technical difficulties.
I'm going to end our series with a bit of hope, but also a bit of caution. First of all, researchers are just starting to figure this stuff out. But things are hopeful. There have already been really successful examples of people figuring out ways to counter biases.
Orchestras have historically had far more male musicians than they had female, and so some of the women started saying, well, I think there's bias. And of course the people listening to the auditions were very skeptical of that, so they put up a screen, and so they wouldn't see the gender of whoever was auditioning. At first, the screen didn't change the percentage of women versus men being hired particularly much. But someone noticed that before some of the people auditioning, there was a click, click, click sound. High heels.
And once they asked people to remove their shoes, things in orchestras got relatively equal. So though it takes experimentation and refinement to work things out, people are finding solutions. The caution is that with the complexities of the real world, dealing with implicit bias isn't going to be a magic cure-all that fixes everything. Implicit bias explains some of the difficulties we face around race, but isn't the only factor. But it is something that all of us should actively think about.
Okay, that's a brief introduction to give you a sense of what we're talking about in terms of unconscious bias. Our expert panel can go into it in more detail. So now let's go to the PowerPoint and let's get through that pretty rapidly. All right, this is what we're talking about today. And you can go to the next one right now. Here's IEN, for those of you who don't know, and these are dated numbers. We have over 200 members at IEN, and we have about 68 asset managers who are managing close to $14 trillion in assets. That's trillion with a T. And our asset managers, our underlying funds, have a combined assets AUM of 117 billion. Yes, I said 117 billion, for those of you who don't know. We have 18 OCIOs, consultants, that are managing close to $4 billion in that arena. And you can go to the website to get more information. Here's my point. Right here within our organization is a tremendous amount of expertise and a tremendous amount of assets under management. Next, please. So since this is Juneteenth, we should talk about that. We like to say at Omni, keep the holiday, show me the money. Next slide, please. Here's Juneteenth. These approximations. 250,000 free Blacks were kept as slaves for 130 weeks. The wages at that time, about $20 per week. If you adjust that for inflation, that's $11 billion. I know that the Reparation Finance Lab is either copying this down or has even more information about this, but here's the point. Keep your holiday, show me the money. I like to see $11 billion for a Juneteenth Galveston people and beyond. Next slide, please. So what we did was we had a bunch of high school students compete in a national economics competition, and they were honored during Juneteenth at the NASDAQ and at the New York Stock Exchange. And one of the presentations that one did was on that one group did was on reparations. The group that won did it on prison system and how it's draining our economy and not really working as well. That guy in the middle, that's Paris Prince. So IEN was at NASDAQ, and we were at the New York Stock Exchange as well on June 17th. Next slide. We were honored. I have a mentorship program called Omni Wall Street Advantage. We were honored for you New Yorkers. That's the tower in Times Square that was put up there. And so we were recognized, and hopefully in the future, IEN will be written up there. And we'll be honored and recognized at NASDAQ and the stock exchange as well. Next. We also went to the New York Stock Exchange for the closing bell. On the right is Richard Stewart of Take Your Seat, which focuses on putting more Black people on boards. And on the left were HBCU business deans. So IEN has a concerted effort to engage with HBCU business deans, and they were there at the closing bell of the stock exchange. Paris will give you more information about that down the road. Keep going. Next. I'm gonna take a minute on this slide. Not going through every box, but 1958, the SBA formed the first SBIC. That was the beginning of institutional private equity capital. 1968, the Kerner Commission said we're moving towards two societies, separate and unequal. That was after the riots of 67 and 68. In 1969, MESBICs were created so that Negro businessmen, that was the term they used, could get access to capital. In 71, NAIC, which is a group of minority-owned venture capital firms, was created. Skipping down below, 1981, the NAACP Fair Share Program was created. In 1985, NASP, which is a group of minority asset managers and brokers, was formed. And in 1999, NAA, made up of Latino asset managers, was formed. And in 2006, Asian investment managers were formed. So this is the whole continuum. I skipped a couple, but the idea is this has been going on for a long time. Next slide, please. How am I on time, please?
Yeah, you're coming up on time.
All right, let me know when I have 30 seconds left. If you want to know what diverse managers look like, this is what they look like. Everybody here is an investment professional in the asset management industry. We have a bigger collage with more people. This is a small one. The gentleman in the middle is, I'm proud to say, 83 years old, Mark Kazanov, one of my mentors, and Demetriouse's, who created Progress Investment Management and allocated money to money managers. Next, feel free to let me know when I have 15 seconds. Next
right
slide.
now, 15 seconds.
Fine. The industry is getting woke. Harvard Business School's done a study. Stanford's done a study. Next slide, please. We end on time. And even the CFA Institute is woken up to the DEI. So We have a conversation with them next week, talking about this very subject. And my last slide that I'll do here is this. NAACP, 78 companies signed agreements in 1981 to put more Blacks on boards, hire and promote more Blacks, buy more from Black businesses, and support foundations. And today, NAACP Fair Share Program has an ETF called NACP. That's the ticker symbol. And they are a member of IEN. So right here in the room, in our membership, we have a number of people and resources to address this subject. And on that note, I will turn it back over to our moderator and let us continue on with the discussion. Thank you all very much. Last thing, put questions in the chat room and put comments in the chat room. And if you want any further information, let Paris know.
Okay, perfect. Now that we further set the table and given you a history about where we've been on this journey and this still large problem that we see in this nation in terms of getting access to capital, diverse managers, let me just tell you a little bit more about my work before we turn it over to Demetriouse, because he really focuses on the training and further education we all do that needs to happen in this industry. My role was created after our CIO, Mike Miller, had just returned from a client meeting, and the client was actually Thurman White of Progress, and you all are familiar with that, but he asked, how many diverse managers do you have in our portfolio, the foundation at the time in which he was the board chair, and are you spreading those managers across your client base? That was a really important question, because when we went back, and this predates me, this was back in 2013, when we looked, our CIO admitted we're not doing anything right. We need to enter those networks. We need to think broadly about, again, diversification, as I explained it earlier, because that is really the best downside protection that you can have when you're building portfolios through diversity of thought to be inclusive of everyone. So democratizing capital and inclusive capital is the name of the game here. Thurman and others at the foundation could not believe that Crucial had created a role for someone to focus on building a pipeline, going out to find the individuals that many said they couldn't find. And if they could find them, they underestimated them in terms of them outperforming, but they actually did outperform or perform just as well as their white male counterparts. So the first thing I did in my role is I educated myself, and I want to turn to you all to some really great resources. I read Mike Miller's paper that he wrote with the president of that foundation at the time. It's called Investment Manager Diversity, the Hardest Taboo to Break. That gave me the power and sort of the knowledge and it was the impetus of how to find these managers that we didn't have access to. So the first thing I did was a simple Google search that anyone could do. I Googled investment manager diversity, and I found NASP, the National Association of Securities Professionals. This organization existed for decades. I wish I had known about it at least 10 years prior to me stepping into this role, because I might have been a different individual. I might have taken a different trajectory in life if I had known about the sea of Black asset managers across the alternatives industry. It was many asset class managers there. And I heard all about their strategies. I heard about the challenges and the barriers to entry. And I brought all of these inquiries back to our CIO for us to examine. We put a process in place that's really, really more robust today. But the first thing we did was something called the weekend review. We took the weekend to actually consider all of these opportunities. Mike Miller taught me what worked and what didn't work. It had nothing to do with diversity, but more with our investment philosophy and how people are investing. And then we scheduled meetings. We escalated them to the proper asset class analysts. Today, we have restructured rather, our investment team so that our analysts are allowed to go anywhere that their interests will take them. We do have subject matter experts, but that work, the impetus of that work was really important in terms of scaling to where we are now. We are not taking a victory lap. There's so much work to do. So again, of the 35 billion that we manage, we only have 4.2 billion allocated to diverse managers across different asset classes. And we're here today to talk about endowments. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Demetriouse, because I want to ask a question to you, and you can go ahead and present. Do we need more education in this area? Why do we need more education in this area? It's not your typical diversity training, because some are becoming diversity exhausted, but I think that you take a really unique and interesting approach to your work. And so I'd like you to share more about it with this audience.
Thank you, Angela. And Dorien, thank you for that history lesson you took us through. I'm going to invoke Maya Angelou at this moment, who once said, "I did then what I knew then, but now that I know better, I do better." And so when it comes to needing more education about this, absolutely. I mean, you just shared some numbers that a little over 10% of your portfolio consists of investing in minority-owned funds, right? And when you look across the board, that number is pretty consistent. When you look at the numbers being a lot less than what we would hope them to be in terms of having people of color be money managers, especially with this audience. Some of the toughest investments to get are from the people who are in this room. And so I just wanted to point that out and highlight that. So I also want to meet, now shifting to, again, the presentation. Another person that I'm very fond of that we use in our work is James Baldwin, right? The Fire Next Time. And we like to meet our clients where they are in the journey. To your point of the question, Angela, some you're really at the beginning. Again, I don't know what I don't know, so we meet you there. Some are more curious, a little further along, and so we meet them there as well. And so he once said that a journey is called that because you cannot know what you will discover on the journey. So as you're learning about this, pay attention to what's happening to you. Are you becoming triggered, activated, angry? To earlier point that was made, a lot of us grew up, didn't have any history lesson on Juneteenth. And then we become adults and saying, my gosh, Tulsa happened, Juneteenth happened. Yes, indeed, they did. And then as it further continues, or what you will do with what you find. Okay, now I'm learning, what am I going to do with this? I have some compassion, I have some empathy. Now what am I going to do? Nor what you find will do to you. Is this going to change you? Being here, our hope is that you come out of here saying, I got to do one thing differently. And back to Angela's point, get educated on this topic. There's a great resource by a professor from Harvard Business School, Josh Lerner, who wrote about diversity in asset management. It was written in 2018. It's still relevant today. So we'll find that and put that in the chat for you. But that's a seminal piece of work that should be a baseline for everyone who's here today. So we can continue from here.
Demetriouse,
Right.
I just wanted to interject really quickly and remind everyone to use that chat feature and send your questions and your thoughts to the panelists. We have some thoughts here from Jerusha Stewart from Take Your Seat to Demetriouse. Some of the hardest investments to get are from the people in this room. Why is this? How can we create change in this realm?
Great question. I'm going to address that as we go through the unconscious bias, because I think unconscious bias has a lot to do with it. Because back to Crucial's experience, it being connected to networks that Angela, Dorien, and people like us are connected to, whether it's through NASP or NEIC, we know who all the people are who are performing in the top quartile. And so we got to make them aware of these investment managers and then make the process for them and accessing you a lot easier versus going through your gatekeepers, which a lot of the consultants or the third parties play for these firms. So creating access to you is very, very important. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on. Thank you for the question. So unconscious bias, unbiased, so what, now what? That was a gift of a comment that a white male made to me, my gosh, 5 years ago when I started doing this training. Because he said, okay, great, you told me I'm biased, now what am I supposed to do with it? So what we will try and do going forward is make this actionable for people and take a pragmatic approach to it. Because again, I'm not here for an academic exercise. I really want to lead people today with a tool. So we can move on from here.
All right. I'm sorry, you have another slide to share?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll move through these pretty efficiently so that people can get the know-how. And I think there might be a question. So this is, what's all the buzz about bias? I suspect that many of you in the room, in the audience, have had some form of unconscious bias training at this point. The point we want to make here is that in organizations, for you to ignore this topic is really to your peril. Because what we do is we go in organizations and we say, define what it is, right? These are shortcuts, heuristics that we all take to make our lives a lot easier. And what we say to folks is, we're not here to rid you of your bias. That's impossible. We're here to make you more aware of it so that it can lead to better decision-making as it relates to that first question about, why is this audience the toughest, investment to get, right? We got to break down those barriers. We can move on from here. I'll let you read the slides as we move on so that we don't bog it down with my doing that. So historically, it's a matter of survival, right? Way back when we were, early in our journey as humans, we were fearful of other tribes, right? And we had to be in order to survive. So we teach it really as a matter of survival and understanding, coming into a room like this, am I under threat or not? So that's one of the first things we address with organizations is understanding the threat level of even coming into a conversation like this. Do I feel safe or not? Let's move on from here. Okay, so again, you look at this graph here, we take in 11 pieces of information at any one time, yet by the time it gets to our brain in a split second, we can only process 40 to 50 pieces of that information that gets absorbed. And the last part of it is the selective attention. We kind of keep what we want and toss out the rest. And that is something that has gotten in the way of us making decisions, because the information that we select is often informed by how we were raised, educated, what our worldview is on a particular topic, gets informed by our filter of bias. So we can move on from here. Okay, and so when we do activate our bias and we start excluding people, right, that actually hurts. And what we have people do is like put their fingers over their, 2 fingers over their right ear, right? There's this amygdala, that greenish material above your right ear that's about 4 business cards thick. And that's the area that is activated by pain. So when you exclude people, it hurts like a bee sting. It can make some people hyperventilate and the like. So be mindful of the impact that your unconscious or conscious bias can have on people, because it's actually painful. We can move on from here. And so Daniel Kahneman, who wrote this seminal work called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, came up with this system of thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is where we spend 95% of our time. It's instinctual, it's intuition, call it our gut, right? And then only 5% of our time we spend in rational thinking, which is more slow, thoughtful, effortful, and conscious and reliable. Just making people aware of it. He doesn't say one system is better than the other, but just be aware that our minds, the way we think, 95% of our time is just snap judgments. We can move on from here. So in summary, we're not going to read this. I'm just going to say one thing. Bias can be potentially useful or destructive. And so I want you to be mindful of that. And again, it's attitudes and stereotypes that are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness that can lead to positive or negative treatment of others. We can move on from there. Okay, how does it show up in the workplace? Just the one thing, when you look around and everyone in the room looks like you, has the same resume, think about why that might be the case, okay? Because when you're excluding people, it leads to this third bullet here. Lack of engagement of underrepresented groups leads to them leaving your organization at faster rates than the majority. We can move on from there. Okay, and so the last slide here is the tool that I want everyone to have. This is when you check for your own bias. And you think about, does this person remind you of yourself, right? Who doesn't like people who are unlike that, right? We like people who are like us. We like what we like. And then does this person remind you of someone, positive and negative? That happens to a lot of us, particularly people of color, where people are clenching the purses and crossing the street. I had nothing to do with whatever that is you're thinking about me, but it happens. And are these things about this person that particularly influence your impression about these people? How they dress, for example, is a big one. And then what assessments have you already made about this person? Are they grounded in truth or your own interpretations? Most of the time, which is at the heart of unconscious bias, they're not grounded in any truth, but merely interpretations that have been formed by our cultural upbringing, education, and so forth. So this is the screenshot, ladies and gentlemen, to keep this with you and be mindful of how you activate your bias and how you can check for it. Okay, let's see what we have here. I think, okay, we can move on from here. So we can, again, here are practical ways, again, screenshot opportunity, going back to the high heels and how you might reduce the bias in your hiring processes from blind resume reviews. We like that a lot. And then seek diversity goals. Look at who's missing from your organization and be intentional about what gaps you're trying to fill. Because we work with organizations, they often say, oh, we want more people of color. And I challenge them, let's be specific. Let's look at demographic groups and understand why they're leaving, and then create a culture where they can feel like they can see themselves in it, rise in it, and feel like they can belong. Okay, we can move on from here. I think that might be it. Wonderful. Took a little longer than I'd hoped, but here we go.
Demetriouse, thank you so much for that presentation. There's so much to unpack, so many thoughts that come to my mind, some great reactions. So I also have a background in HR, and my background in HR tells me that you don't let someone fall into this dark place, this abyss. The feedback is very important. So you need to understand where you are in anyone's process. That background informs my decision and the policy and the way we approach our work and getting access to capital, or just first meeting managers and understanding who they are as a person before we even talk about the strategy, the firm that you're building and your background. And so we believe that critical feedback is important because many of the managers that we meet with, they don't know how to talk to investors. Maybe they spun out and they have a background in, in asset management working at another firm, and they have the blueprint or the playbook and they know the lingo and the language. But then what we see at Crucial is a lot of venture capitalists entering the market from non-traditional backgrounds, being exhausted by the fact that as founders, as entrepreneurs, it should not be this hard to get access to capital and to get attention to something that I think is a great idea. If we are talking about hair extensions and how Maven has actually disrupted the hair care market, you need an individual at that table across from you while you're pitching. So that takes me to some of the things that we've done at Crucial. We have a very diverse firm, but what's really critical is that leadership is diverse and they actually co-sign with everything that I have found in terms of connecting with networks and the training that took place with our analysts. We have such ongoing conversations. 90% of the time we talk about diversity on our now Zoom calls, since we're still in a pandemic, every single day. And so having that diverse talent on the investment team is very critical because you have to have cultural competency. You do have to have compassion. And people want to know what they don't know. So that's why follow-up and feedback is really important. And I promise I could not do this work until we implemented that in our process. And so I see someone in the chat. I want to just react to some things. You all need to know, if you don't know already, about AFBI. It's a wonderful network. It is a nonprofit organization of over 250, probably more, because the last conference that Dorien and I attended, where we did a panel, there had to be more than that. Thousands of Black executives and professionals from nonprofit organizations were there. And we did a similar panel, conducted a similar panel about access to capital. And what I saw was a lot of Black professionals trying to figure things out. I saw a host of program officers and managers, and they wanted to know what was the path to becoming a CEO of their organization. And some of the advice that I gave is join a board. Most nonprofit endowments have board seats where there are volunteer board seats. So join the board, join many boards, but it's also critical that you join the investment committee board so that you can have a vote with respect to the decisions that are being made there. Something else I saw in the chat is a study that was conducted by Aluminum Capital that talked about unconscious bias in asset management industry. That was also co-sponsored by or written by Stanford. And that was a critical study because that study said something amazing. Not only did it uncover the unconscious bias in the investment decision-making process of consultants, and rightfully so, we were called gatekeepers, but I wanted to be the gatekeeper of diversity, because one day I want someone to say, who the heck left the gate open, right? And so we have baked into our process this fair process of equity, of hour-long meetings and more, to really hear from the individual. So I want to point you to that study. And I also want to point you to a really, really important paper, because it really informs our policy and the work and how we are training analysts at our firm and becoming conscious. Everyone has biases. We ask that you manage them and that they don't creep into your investment decision-making. And so James Norman, he is an entrepreneur and he founded Pilotly. You can look that up. He talked about how venture capitalists need to talk to Black founders, how you need to have some cultural competency and have some connections with them. Going beyond writing a check. What is your operational expertise and experience to knowing the plight of a Black founder? And so I bring that that informs me in our firm in terms of how we need to see Black and brown managers that sit across from us in various asset classes. What sort of cultural competency do we have on our side of the table? We want to meet you where you are. That is critically important. So I can't say enough about diverse teams. So now I want to turn it back over to you, Dorien, because I know that you are well informed about the many things that are happening in this industry. You know about the SEC study and the critical subcommittee that is led by Garcia Hamilton, a Hispanic firm located in Texas. I'm just going to kick it over to you to share more resources and talk about that work.
Well, thanks, Angela. And before I do that, this is the Stanford study that she's talking about right here. So you can either read it or you can call on people who have read it to get the information. We're trying to condense this into a one-page summary, but we're excited that Stanford did that. And then I need to point this out too. This is the Pensions and Investments. We call it P&I. It's the best publication in the industry that everyone reads. This is the most popular issue in the industry because it has the largest money managers in it. That's what's on the front page. On the back page, it's time to retire inequality for good. So this subject is making it into the mainstream. We just have to be prepared for it and network together to do it. And now to get just the update that Angela was talking about, the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, has a subcommittee on diverse asset management. It's led by Bill Garcia, a Yale graduate, Hispanic, Houston, Texas, has an asset management firm that I think has 22 billion in fixed income assets. And a good friend. And that committee has put forth some questions and created some rules for diversity among consultants and getting data on diversity among boards. And it's being discussed right now. So there's climate change issues at the SEC and diversity issues at the SEC. Climate change gets a lot of attention, diversity issues don't. And yet you, can send letters and emails in to the SEC saying, we'd like you to act on this. And they respond to that. Gil Garcia will tell you they'll respond to this. And we need to do that. Robert Marchman, African-American, Harvard Business School alum, fellow Harvard Business School alum, is the director of diversity, DEI, at the SEC. So we're in constant communication with him. They had 300 internships last year open for the first year. They made them paid internships open up, and they have them again this year. So we need to get more of a pipeline built into that and network so that we can get more people. If you get an SEC job on your resume, the hardest job on Wall Street, your very first job. I was lucky mine happened in high school. So if you can get an SEC internship on your resume as a college student or a law student, you're on your way. Can I answer your question, Angela?
You sure did. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
You should also know that there are various trade organizations, in addition to NAIC and NAST, SEO sponsors for educational opportunity. I want to share with the audience that I attend pitch competitions where a lot of Black founders, entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists appear. So Culture Shifting Weekend is the largest network convening Black and Brown founders and women and venture capitalists. And I go there to not only hear from the founders, but I also attend the conference to find venture capitalists who also refer other investors and other asset classes to me, knowing what crucial focus is. So I think it's important to have boots on the ground with respect to being on an investment committee or even on the investment team as an LP, because you really need to hear from the people. In my role early on, I went on a listening tour because I want to know exactly what the problems are so that we can build systems and policies, and we can tear down these structural barriers that are really, really discriminatory in this industry. And so the best way I knew how to do that is for this little Black girl from the projects in Brooklyn, New York, to actually connect with the people. I can talk with my people. I understand the plight of Black and Brown individuals, and as a woman. And so I listen differently with my background in psychology. So thank you, Demetriouse, for reminding us of Daniel Kahnen's work with Think Fast. I read that book many years ago in college, and then I reread it as an adult. And it's really, really a great resource so that you can actually think about the different approaches that you can take, and also think about how you play in this ecosystem just as a human being, as an individual, to sort of deconstruct some of the biases that we inherently have. I want to make sure that I turn it over to you, Paris, in case there's any questions that we're missing in the chat.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you just mentioned that, Angela, and the point that you just brought up about breaking the systemic barriers and the systemic injustice. You know, when we talk about bias, it might not be as obvious that, you know, to call racism bias really just marginalizes it, because it's much bigger than that. You know, we have intentionally separate and unequal systems, and we've had so many so-called racial awakenings over centuries. And, you know, the realism is that economic advances have been squashed. And so, you know, I saw a comment earlier from Enid at the Reparations Finance Lab that mentioned that, you know, 14 to 17 trillion is owed to formerly enslaved African Americans. And so here where I live in Richmond, Virginia, you know, I've seen a lot of symbolic statues come down. You know, we have Juneteenth as well, which we're celebrating now, which again is really symbolism. It's important, but it's not the real history. And so I see a question here from Zeke kind of related to that. Like, Zeke is asking, what are our suggestions for creating board opportunities and opportunities for historically underrepresented class? And again, this just goes so much deeper than just the biases we all have related to everything, but, you know, racism and those who are historically underrepresented is just so much bigger than that.
I would say I would walk into a nonprofit. I would know about the community foundations that exist in my area, my region, and just check them out, see what's happening, see how you can join those boards. I'm seeing a lot of GPs, general partners join boards, asset managers, join boards, because their vote and their presence there is hugely important. You can take an unpaid board seat and sort of just learn as you go, but I would say be a fly on the wall to understand the dynamics of that board and that group, so that eventually you can become a critical part of the conversation and you can vote based on your interests. So volunteer board seats, and there are other resources that we can share later on to show you the many areas in nonprofits that you can actually, contribute either your current expertise, or if you want to develop a new level of expertise. There's so many nonprofits focused on getting people of color and women on boards. All right, so Dorien, I'm going to turn it back over to you, because in the few minutes that we have, I guess you can kick things off with telling us, what was your reaction to the racial protests that we saw during the public execution of George Floyd, and how does that inform who you are in your work? Because I know I felt it. I have a Black son, I have a Black daughter, and my son is 25, my daughter is 19, and I was thinking when I got the text from them, they want to go out and protest. And I just thought, okay, I have bail money for everyone, because I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And so we know that we have to have the talk with our sons and daughters, but those protests, the global protests, if anyone doesn't know that correlates to the work that we do every single day in asset management, you must be under a rock, or you need to be informed how that directly impacts the work that we are doing.
Well, I agree. Here's the short answer. It reinvigorated and re-inspired me. I saw intergenerational, interracial, international response. And I said, wow. So I was an old anti-redlining community activist back in the 80s in Brooklyn, New York. And so, activism, isn't a good paying job. So I kind of stepped back from doing a lot of advocacy. And when I saw that, I said, man, young people, white and Black, international, and they had marches in Vermont. I have high school friends up there, over in Europe, and they were all getting it. I said, everybody, they need to be empowered. So it invigorated me to brush off studies that I've done and things that I've done from 30, 40 years ago and say, let me give it to you. Let me give it to all of you, because we were once those 30-year-old rabble rousers fighting for social justice, and we were doing things, and then we had families and other things came into play. So I'm looking to empower the next group of 25 to 45-year-olds with as much as I can, and the 55s and 65-year-olds in terms of getting board seats at the top and moving and raising money and capital on down. I'll mention two last things, please, for the sake of time. One is Citibank did a study that said our economy would be $16 trillion larger if Black businesses could get the loans from banks that they could, and homeowners got what they needed to get. And lastly, we want you from IEM to send us, if you're an alum of an HBCU, we need to know that, because we're talking to HBCUs. If you have a CFA, we need to know that, because we're actively talking to the CFA Institute about DEI within the CFA community. And if you have any ideas or suggestions of things you want to volunteer with us, let us know. I'm done. Thank you very much.
All right, Demetriouse, I'm going to kick it off to you to see what your reaction to it. And I know you talk a lot about allyship in your training. We saw very diverse groups go out to protest. We saw Portland. I was looking at a news report about Portland, and they used to have sunset laws, states like that. So what's your reaction to my question?
I would just want to build on what Dorien started us off with. Again, it was global, it was multi-generational. And the other component, which is why many of us are here today, was the corporate response was unprecedented. And so now we're seeing billions of dollars that have been poured into DEIB, if you will. And now people are waiting to see how that's going to translate into some meaningful difference. Some of it was performative, and some of it is, and then now we're trying to figure out how much of it is authentic. I will share with you that, our sense in the DEIB community is that 2 years after the fact, interest is starting to wane a bit. So the question becomes, how do we sustain this without the need of another George Floyd incident in order for people to continue to want to make a difference in bridging the wealth gap in this country. So,
all right. Thank you so much, guys, for your participation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Paris, but I want to talk about, just mention the importance of investment policy work. Diverse manager language has to be there because that work will create sustainability and accountability. And so now over to you, Paris. Thank you so much for having us.
Please thank our panelists and thank you to our participants, our partners, our sponsors, Prime Buchholz and Global Endowment Management. Thank you. The work of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is really a multifaceted effort. It requires all of our innovation and dedication to commit to change. So as I close out this webinar, you can see here on your screen, not to be missed future events on JEDI and racial equity investing coming up July 13th, and also decarbonizing our maritime industry and the global supply chain on July 26th. And actually, part 2 of this 3-part series on unconscious bias is planned and forthcoming for a date in August to be determined. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining in with us today. I'll see you next time.